Good morning. It's Friday, January 5th. I'm Alan Saunders, and this is Gajtka's Got Game on the Rivers Edge PGH, riversedgepgh.com. I'm filling in for Matt Gajtka. It's his show, and he'll be calling in later. He is on the road covering the Pittsburgh Penguins. I guess he's in Brooklyn. And that's where the Penguins are playing tonight against the New York Islanders. In the meantime, you'll have me for about a half an hour till we bring Matt in. And we're going to talk sports as always. Probably going to discuss in good detail the issues the Pittsburgh Penguins are having in their season, the struggles they've had, the reasons for them, and what the right course of action is for General Manager Jim Rutherford. And just what's the realistic expectation, I guess, Penguins fans should have at this point. I might rant a bit about the Pirates offseason if I have some time to do so. And I also want to talk about some women's sports teams in the city that I don't think get enough attention. It is a large sports landscape in this city. It is easy for those that are below the top tier to get lost in the shuffle. And I wanted to pull out some highlights just to kind of put a spotlight on some people that deserve it, I think, more than they get. But let's jump in with the Penguins here because I think that's the big story. I watched the game last night as they were blown out at home by the Carolina Hurricanes 4-0, and it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all. And I don't know, maybe it was the writer in me looking for something to highlight as a sort of feature for a story. But the second Carolina goal was a big one. The Penguins were down one, but they were still in the game, and it was still close. And there's a 3-on-2 the other way. And a nice pass comes across, and the pass comes back into the center. And it's Matt Hunwick not tracking his guy back into the corner. It was Ryan Reeves not tracking his guy back into the slot. And it was the pass from the corner to the slot, going right through both of them for what was essentially an empty net goal as Matt Murray was down and out. And I think Hunwick and Reeves are a big part of what's wrong with the Penguins this season. Those were General Manager Jim Rutherford's big offseason moves, two of them, and for the most part, they haven't really panned out. And so I think that's sort of the lens through which I'm looking at the Penguins season, what should be done about it, and what the right thing is to do going forward for the rest of the 2017-18 season. Winning the Stanley Cup is really hard. Winning the Stanley Cup twice in a row was very improbable. I don't want to say it's impossible for the Penguins to win a third straight Stanley Cup, but I think that people like general managers and team executives get paid to look at things objectively, not like a fan. And so an objective viewpoint is it's pretty darn unlikely that the Penguins are going to win the Stanley Cup again, despite the fact that they have two of the best handful of players in hockey in Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. That doesn't gift them anything. They're not granted the right to be in the Stanley Cup Finals. They're not even granted the right to be in the playoffs, as we've seen that they're currently out of playoff position. Although I do think they will eventually make it. Winning the Stanley Cup is really hard. Winning the Stanley Cup 3 times, it hasn't been done in the Cap era. It hasn't been done since I've been alive. So realistically, winning the Stanley Cup in 2018 is not something that has a high probability of happening. It didn't have a high probability of happening before the start of the season, and it certainly doesn't have a high probability of happening with the Penguins not even in playoff position here on January 5th. So I don't think there's a trade that can be made that's going to fix things, that's going to put the Penguins back into Stanley Cup contention as a favorite or something like that. That's just not going to happen. Can they get in the playoffs? Sure, I expect them to get in the playoffs. But just getting in the playoffs is not the same as winning the Stanley Cup. And it doesn't require the same amount of talent. It doesn't require the same amount of depth. And so can the Penguins get to the playoffs? Absolutely. And I expect them to. But as far as expectations go, I think that's about where Penguins fans should draw the line. As far as winning another Stanley Cup, I'm just not sure that's reasonable. And so then when you look at the trades that could be made, I don't think the Penguins have a trade that isn't drastic and dramatic that would get them to Stanley Cup contention, right? And most of them would involve doing something really short-sighted, right? Like trading Chris Letang at maybe his lowest value ever as an NHL player for, say, a rental center, right? Now, would a third-line center make the Penguins better right now? Absolutely. Is that a smart trade as far as asset management and the future of the team? Absolutely not. And so could the Penguins make that trade? I'm sure. But that would be a terrible decision, even if it ended up with them doing a little bit better this year. I think that it's just not a very realistic thing to expect them to win the Stanley Cup, and expecting Jim Rutherford to make a trade that's going to help them win the Stanley Cup. To me, I mean, that's kind of a slippery slope, because I think one of the reasons they're in the situation that they're in is that they kind of didn't do a great job this offseason. I mean, you look at the moves the Penguins have made. You know, they traded for Ryan Reeves. I don't think there's anyone that would do anything other than say that was a disaster. They traded for Riley Sheahan, who has been fine, and they didn't trade much to give up for him, but he's clearly not the answer as a third-line center. They traded for Jamie Alexiak, who seems to be stabilizing the defense a little bit, but certainly not the kind of game changer talent-wise that's going to make a team that's on the borderline of the playoff picture into a Stanley Cup favorite. And then you look at the free agent signings. Matt Hunwick, who's made 3 years, $6.75 million contract. He's barely holding on to an everyday roster spot. Antti Niemi was an unmitigated disaster as a backup goaltender. Greg McKay didn't work out. You just go down the line, and the things that the Penguins did this year, they didn't work. And so taking that recent history, and I think Jim Rutherford deserves a lot of credit for building back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, but the last 5 or 6 moves haven't gone so well, and now you want him to make a big trade that's going to throw things apart, and man, I just think it's a bad idea. I think this team is pretty well suited to have a better year in 2018-19 than they're having in 2017-18, even if they stay mostly the same. And I think there are certainly some areas where the team has a deficit that they could look to rectify. Center, one of them. But I don't think a drastic or dramatic, game-changing type trade, like the Phil Kessel trade, I don't think it's in the cards, and I don't think it would be wise even if it is. Pirates general manager Neil Huntington used the phrase bridge year after the Pirates won 98 games, and it was obvious to him at that time that they were going to have to take a step back before they could take a step forward. He got blasted for that comment, but he wasn't really wrong. The Pirates did take a step back. Taking a step back in his mind, at least, was seemingly inevitable. And now, will it work? I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I'm of the mindset that the Penguins should be thinking of this season in a similar way. They're probably not going to win the Stanley Cup again this year. So what can they do this year to put themselves in the best position to win the Stanley Cup in 2018-19 while not doing anything to necessarily hurt their chances this season? I think that's the way that Jim Rutherford should be approaching this trade deadline. And I think there are moves to be made within that paradigm, because I think most people would look at the Penguins as a team that, they have to be buyers. They need to add. They need more defense. They need more centers. They need more rugged wingers. They might need a goaltender. But the Penguins also have a lot of pieces that they don't really need going forward. And so if they can sort of play both sides of that exchange, maybe they could work out a couple deals that end up really helping them. The pieces that I see, and the one that everyone's been talking about for a while, is Ian Cole, as a player that's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. He's likely not coming back. In the Penn situation, that's a player that needs to be traded out, I think. I don't see how they can keep him. He's an asset. Someone will pay for him, and they can replenish their minor league pool of talent. They could get some other pieces that they like. They could get draft picks, which they've traded away a lot of under Jim Rutherford. That's an asset that they're not going to use next year. So they should take a look at finding a way to move on from it. Another one to me is Patrick Hornquist. Patrick Hornquist is a really, really well-liked player in this town. I really like his game, but I just think looking at it objectively, Patrick Hornquist is 31. He's going to want a multi-year contract. He's only 5'11", 190. And he spends his days and weeks and months going to the front of the net and taking physical abuse. And I'm just not sure that a 31-year-old whose job description involves getting the crap beat out of him, cross-checked, high-sticked, hooked, mugged, punched, blocking shots, taking pucks off his feet, that just doesn't sound like a recipe for a guy that needs a 5-year contract to me. It just doesn't. And so if they're not going to extend Patrick Hornquist, then they should move on and they should trade him and find a way to get assets that they can either use or they can exchange for other assets to get the pieces that they need. Interestingly enough, I think the team needs more Patrick Hornquist type players. I think that the team's speed has been such an advantage for them over the last 2 seasons that they fell in love with it just a bit. And you need more than just speed. The Penguins won 2 Stanley Cups with Patrick Hornquist and Chris Kunitz largely holding down top 6, top 9 roles. So those are guys that could skate, yes, but their primary role is winning battles in the boards, winning battles in the corners, puck retrieval, going to the front of the net, scoring on rebounds, screening goaltenders, driving to the center on a rush and taking defenders with them. That's their primary role. Yes, they can skate. They have to skate in order to keep up with the other players on their lines. But those guys did something different than a Connor Sherry or a Jake Gensel or Phil Kessel or Carl Hagelin, who are all very skilled skaters, very skilled hockey players. They don't do those things that Hornquist and Kunitz did, and Kunitz is gone. I don't see a long-term future here for Hornquist. So if the Penguins are looking to make an acquisition, I think a replacement for one of those guys, a player that can play a puck retrieval, gritty game, that can also skate with a Crosby or a Malkin, is a necessity for the Penguins going forward. So that's something they could look for. And I think when you look at the back line, Ian Cole is available because the Penguins need right-handed defensemen. They have Schultz, and they have Letang, and they have Frankie Corrado and Chad Ruhwedel. They need all 4 of those guys are probably NHL defensemen, and at least, maybe not in that order, but at least deserve a spot on a roster. But the problem with all 4 of them is that they're offensive-minded guys. Chris Letang is an offensive-minded guy. Justin Schultz is a pass-first offensive-minded guy. Corrado Ruhwedel, lesser skilled, but the same kind of concept. They don't have a shutdown, penalty-killing, defense-first right guy anywhere in their lineup. Cole is sort of playing that spot at times, but he's a left-handed shot, and so they need a right D. And so if they can get a right D, and if they can get, and it's interesting because you're basically looking to acquire what they're trading out, but those pieces they're not going to have, so they need to find a way to get some other pieces and use those assets, and then they can also trade. But I wouldn't make the kind of trades that they've made in the past. I wouldn't be trading for rental players, and I wouldn't be trading their first-round draft pick. I would be trading, making trades that set them up for next season. So it's players with 2 years on their contract, or players that are currently in the AHL, but they think are very close to being able to make the jump to the NHL maybe later this season or next season. That's the kind of things that I would be looking for the Penguins to do. And I guess we'll see. We'll see what Jim Rutherford's interpretation of that is. The one thing I will say is that I don't think we're going to have to wait for very long. He hasn't been one that's beholden to the trade deadline. He likes to make his deals ahead of time. That deadline's coming quickly here, and I wouldn't expect him to wait forever to sort of announce his intentions one way or the other. It doesn't have to be a huge trade for him to make it known that, okay, the Penguins are they're gonna add, or they're gonna play it both ways and try to sit on the fence a little bit. But yeah, I think some fence sitting could be in order here, given it's really hard to win 3 straight, and the team looks like it should be in good shape as early as next year to have a big rebound. So that's what I would be looking for Jim Rutherford to do. Got some Twitter comments. Let me know what you think he should do, what you think, what you're expecting him to do. Maybe we'll get to those later in the show when we have Matt on at about 10:30. Until then, let's step aside, take a little break here, and then I will come back and maybe I'll rant on some Pirates next when we return for the second period of Gajtka Game on the River's Edge.
Come on, go! It's green! Come on! Go!
God damn it, Brian. You need to calm down with the road
I'm sick
rage.
of these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You gotta calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle Heaven,
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck Knob,
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
Right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Well, too late now. I gotta keep going. I'm not gonna sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to the Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
Welcome back to the River's Edge, riversedgepgh.com. This is Gajtka Game. I'm Alan Saunders, filling in for Matt Gajtka. Matt will join us from the road in Brooklyn a little bit later this segment. We'll probably talk some more Pens. I talked in the first period a bit about what I think Jim Rutherford should do and what I expect Jim Rutherford to do with the Penguins, who are currently out of playoff position. And in that segment, I mentioned a quote from Pirates general manager Neil Huntington made after the 2015 season, and I wanted to talk a bit about the Pirates because there's a lot of anger when it comes to the Pirates and the fan base, and I understand a lot of it. They had 3 good years. They took a step back in each of the last 2. They don't necessarily look, as of right now, like they're poised to return to the playoffs in 2018, although that could change. But I think the big thing is I don't really understand, I guess, the anger with Pirates fans about everything the team does. Right? I understand that the situation they're in. Certainly, I understand probably better than most how frustrating the situation they're in can be. In that they're a small market team, they're in a division with the Cubs and the Cardinals. The deck is stacked against them from the very beginning, and then they haven't been perfect. They haven't made all the right moves. They haven't made all the right draft picks. And in their situation, they kind of almost have to be in order to make the playoffs every year. So, yeah, that's frustrating. I understand that the whole system is frustrating. What I don't understand is the reaction every time the Pirates do something that literally every team in baseball does all offseason. But when the Pirates do it, it's a big deal. Like, oh, my God, the Pirates claimed a pitcher on waivers yesterday, Shane Carl, who they had drafted originally and then traded to Colorado for a reliever by the name of Rob Scahill. Now, when you're talking about the 40th guy on the 40-man roster, essentially he doesn't matter, right? Because if he matters, then your season's probably over anyway, at any point, right? But let's just for a moment entertain the notion that the 40th guy on the 40-man roster means anything. Shane Carl, he doesn't have very much major league experience. He's only played 3 games. But the Pirates drafted him in the 10th round, and then they traded him for Rob Scahill, who did have major league experience and did play for the Pirates. And then they got their guy back when Colorado put him on waivers. So the Pirates got Rob Scahill for essentially nothing. Now, listen, Rob Scahill wasn't very good either. He had a 2.64 ERA in 28 games with the Pirates in 2015. But you know what? The Pirates went to the playoffs in 2015. And maybe they don't without Rob Scahill's 13 games of 2.64 ERA. The guy's not an all-star, but it wasn't like he was a completely meaningless thing. So the Pirates traded a prospect for a relief pitcher that they used, and then they got that same prospect back on waivers. So that makes the essential price that they paid for Rob Scahill to be nothing whatsoever. And he was a perfectly usable reliever for a season and a piece of another one. And somehow the reaction to that move yesterday and spilling over into this morning even was completely negative. Oh, the Pirates, all they do is waiver trades and they're so cheap, always have to look for a bargain, and God, they never do anything, and they're going to trade all their good players and replace them with this guy. And that's just not, I don't understand that. I can't understand that. I mean, this is just a waiver claim. Every team in baseball makes like 20 of these moves every offseason. Half of these guys that are at that age or that career experience where they're not a major league player, but they need to be on the 40-man roster, some of them are going to get claimed 2-3 times. There are players that are teams that are claiming the Pirates players just as fast as there are Pirates that are claiming other teams' players. It's just a thing that baseball teams do. They all do it. So, and it seems like the Pirates did this one pretty well. They got a guy back that they liked enough to draft after trading him away for a reliever that they used, and all they owed is a waiver claim fee. That's a pretty good deal. I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, he's not, like I said, he's not an all-star. If he matters that much, their season's probably in trouble. But maybe it works out. Maybe it's good. They lost Johnny Barbado, who they tried this with last year, and he was okay, if not great. It doesn't matter. None of this matters. It's just positioning to try to find a diamond in the rough and do what they can with the assets they have, and there's nothing wrong with that. Every team in baseball does it. I don't understand the anger over every little move the Pirates make, and I know that it's amplified by people in the Pittsburgh media that just either, one, have a personal agenda against the Pirates, or two, don't really understand baseball and just flip out at everything the Pirates do as a result. And it drives me nuts because what is he supposed to? They're not going to make any trades, no transactions this whole offseason. That's it. They're not going to make any waiver claims. They're not going to make any minor league deals. They're not going to sign anybody to a non-roster invite because none of that has ever worked out in the Pirates' favor, right? No, that's wrong. They're actually pretty good at this. They're better than the average major league team at sifting through the bargain bin and finding Die Hard in there with the $1.99 movies. They're good at that. In fact, if you ask people around baseball, that's one of Neil Huntington's very best traits that other people in baseball will say is that he finds talented people that other teams have given up on. So yeah, they're going to make waiver trades. They're going to sign people to minor league deals and non-roster camp invites. And first of all, every team does that. It's just part of doing the business of baseball. The second part is they're good at it. So I don't understand why the continual criticism for claiming a relief pitcher on waivers. It drives me nuts. It's one of the most infuriating things about covering this team to me is the consistent negativity about things that they're not. Listen, if you're upset because the Pirates are talking about trading Garrett Cole or they're talking about trading Andrew McCutchen, look, those are things that as a fan, it makes perfect sense to be upset about. I can recall several years ago, the Pirates traded Nate McLouth when he was a very popular player on a bad team and was one of the few players that was somewhat promising on that team. And people were upset. I had a friend at the time, and I was like, man, that was the only guy that I wanted to go see when I went to the game. And like, maybe it was a good trade, I don't know, but I just can't see myself wanting to go see the rest of these guys. I get that. I get that with Kutch. I get that with Garrett Cole. This is a waiver claim for a right-handed relief pitcher that is probably going to pitch less than 30 innings in the majors this year. It essentially doesn't matter. Every team does this. And it just drives me up a wall, the constant negativity about things that are perfectly normal in baseball. Brian, you look like you want to chime in here.
Yeah, I see. I agree with you in your point, but at the same time, this team is so cheap all the time that I think people have it ingrained in their heads that everything they're doing is being on the cheap. And I feel like people have a right to kind of bitch with all of the losing that we've had to endure for so long.
I mean, I guess, but I mean, can you, first of all, I don't actually believe the Pirates are cheap, but there's a difference between like cheap because you want to be and cheap because you have to be. And I think the Pirates lean far more towards the cheap because they have to be than cheap because they want to be. No one's getting rich off the Pirates. Like I don't see their books and people want open the book. It does, because there's not enough money there. The money doesn't add up for the fact that the Pirates have like $50 million they're sitting on every year that they could be spending on extra players. It's just not factual. Could they spend a little bit more? Maybe, I don't know, but certainly not like. They're not the Dodgers. They're not the Yankees. They're not the Cubs. They're not the Cardinals. They're never going to be those teams. They're never going to spend like half of what those teams spend. So, like, I don't know. Was $5 million make them better last year? I don't know. Probably not. But so, yeah, I do think there's some of that. But to me, that's just a nonsensical reaction, right? Like, if you're upset about the Pirates being cheap all the time, then be upset that they didn't sign. Who's the guy that just signed? Chatwood, the pitcher that the Cubs just signed from the Rockies. All right, why didn't the Pirates make that move, man? $10 million a year for a young right-hander, 3 years. That's a good deal. Pirates should have made that one. Don't complain when they claim a pitcher on waivers. This is a completely irrelevant, meaningless deal that literally every team makes half a dozen times in offseason, sometimes more. Like, I understand the anger.
Are there a lot of really intelligent baseball fans in this city, though? Because they've sucked for so long, and they had a couple decent seasons, and now you've got a lot of interest, but not a lot of knowledge to back it up. I know I'm in that camp. I really didn't watch the Pirates until they started having a few good seasons. And
like everything else in this, everything in this city that is sports is viewed through the lens of the Steelers. Everything is well, the Steelers don't do that, so it's probably bad. Or the Steelers do this, so why aren't they doing that?
Uh-huh.
And it's, baseball is different than the NFL, and it has a different structure. And yeah, you're right. I don't think that the Pittsburgh baseball fan base, and what fan base there is frankly older. And so a lot of them aren't in tune with the way that baseball teams are managed in 2017. They get upset that the Pirates don't bunt and hit and run and they strike out too much, and those are complaints that I hear, and I'm like, look around baseball, that's not how things are done anymore. Like that's not the game as it is currently played. So yeah, I do think there are a lot of very casual baseball fans that only are frustrated that the Pirates don't win without really understanding the reasons that they don't or what they're trying to do about it. And there are a lot of older baseball fans that don't understand the way that baseball is played in 2017, and they've only watched the Pirates, and the last thing they can remember being good was Barry Bonds. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I think that plays into a lot of it, but certainly I think any anger towards, frustration and anger for a team that hasn't won a championship since 1979 and has made half a dozen playoff appearances in my lifetime, that's understandable. But I just think it's completely misdirected over waiver claims of relief pitchers the first week of January, which is like the most mundane thing. Like could the Pirates put out a press release for anything less than that without being rightfully mocked? I mean, that is like the bottom when it comes to like what is notable enough that we need to send a press release out. Claiming a right-handed relief pitcher on waivers is like, that's right at the line. Like, yeah, okay, he's going on the 40-man roster. Probably need to put this out there, but that's it. Anything less important than that, they can just wait till announce it to the beginning of spring training. It's anger misdirected, I think, and it frustrates me a lot because I see a lot of it on social media. And, I'm going to take my opportunity to rant. But it's 10:30, so we're going to talk to Matt. Can you bring him in now, or should we take a break first?
Let's take a quick break, and then I'll bring them right back.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to step aside then. We'll be back with an XL-size third period of Gajtka game on the River's Edge, riversedgepgh.com.
Hey, this is David from Pet Clinic, broadcasting from Mr. Small's Theater. You're listening to the River's Edge Radio Network.
Welcome back to Gajtka game on the River's Edge. I'm Alan Saunders, filling in for Matt Gajtka. who will be joining us on the telephone for this segment. Matt is, I believe he's in Brooklyn. Matt, where are you? We need like a Matt tracker map. I said this before, about we can put back here behind me. Where is Matt today?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I guess I've done Sunrise, I've done Boston, and now, I've done Buffalo too, and now Brooklyn. So I'm going up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Thanks again, Alan, for filling in. It's really great of you to do that and good to keep the show going, even in my absence.
Yeah, no problem. I enjoy doing it a lot. We've been talking some Penguins, talking some Pirates. I want to get your take on the Penguins first, since that's where you are and what you're doing there for DK Pittsburgh Sports. I talked a lot about in the first segment about Jim Rutherford's situation right now, where the Penguins are not in a good spot in the standings, and just if making trades in order to best situate this team to try to win a championship this season is actually the best decision to make, given where they are, the likelihood of them winning a third straight Stanley Cup, and when compared to making trades that set the team up to have the best possible success in 2018-19. And I wanted to see where you kind of come in on that discussion.
It's been a dilemma for me, just considering it as an analyst, as a reporter. What would I do if I were in the general manager's seat? Now, I think that they would be better served and they would be closer to the type of team that Jim Rutherford envisioned if they could bolster their center depth. But overall, you have to consider how much they have left in the tank, both physically and mentally. You have to consider that your superstars are a year older and they're into their early 30s now. And you also have to consider that the goaltending situation appears to be rather fluid at the moment, or at least it should be, because Matt Murray has not performed at the level that I think we all expected, although we didn't really know what to expect in some ways, because this is his first season as a number one goalie at this level. And Tristan Jarry has outperformed him, albeit in a smaller sample size. So there are many problems to tackle here, some that might be manageable. Like I said, the center depth, you might be able to figure out a way, if you are Rutherford, to to add to this roster without subtracting too much from an area that would leave you vulnerable in a different spot. But you also have to be careful that you don't get too impatient and that you don't jeopardize this team's chances of winning in 2019 and 2020, because even all the things that I mentioned taken into account, this team will still be pretty well positioned to at least compete for a division championship and possibly for a Stanley Cup championship in the next couple of seasons. And you don't want to do anything rash and really blow it up. And then in a couple of seasons, you're thinking, I wish that I would have had this guy or that guy, kind of like how the Edmonton Oilers are right now with Taylor Hall out in New Jersey. I think he'd be pretty well suited for them at this current moment. So that's the dilemma. It's always the dilemma for a GM, is weighing present against future, or near future against long-term future, to put it more accurately. And it's a tough call, but at the same time, if you have 2 Stanley Cups in the bank, shouldn't that give you some patience? I would imagine it would.
Can they do both? Can they? I hate to say this because it will just be met with instant criticism, but can they be more like the Pirates? Can they play out of both sides of their mouth this year and trade away pieces that are on expiring contracts that they're not likely to sign, while at the same time adding? And what do you think about that idea?
I'm okay with it. If the defense core is healthy, and if we're assuming that the players you're talking about are Ian Cole, and even Patrick Hornqvist, I think, is also
Those are the
worth
two.
looking at.
Yeah.
Now, you lose him, you lose one of the more valuable members of the team. Ian Cole might be a third-pairing defenseman on a really good team, or a second-pairing defenseman on a mediocre team. But those are two trade pieces that you do have, guys whose contracts are going to run out. And there's no rule against re-signing them in the offseason either if you trade them. I know that's a bit unconventional, but that's one way to look at it as well. And if you just take the perspective of asset management, those are the two that you could perhaps throw to the wind and maybe even get some draft picks and try to reload for next season or future seasons down the line. But I always do wonder if that's even, well, number one, if that's even feasible to try to both play for now and play for the near future. And I also wonder the type of an effect that would have on a dressing room. And I think we've seen that with the Pirates over the last couple of years, and whether that played out on the field, I'm not sure, but they are human beings, and you take away a player like an Ian Cole or, in a more extreme circumstance, a Patrick Hornqvist, just because you want to turn those assets into something and not risk losing them for nothing, then you probably put the kibosh on this season, unless you really can make some magic with that trade and somehow improve the team, despite trading a guy who just has a couple of months left before he hits free agency.
Some other things that I think are pretty interesting that they're doing right now. Daniel Sprong, obviously, up and playing in a top 9 role. Jake Gensel is the third-line center. To me, I think those are things that if I was going to make a list as the general manager at Christmas time and said, okay, what are the things that I could try before I absolutely blow this thing up that are moves that you can make and still undo? What else is on that list? Because that's about it for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I thought Sprong was the last big influx of talent that you could make as a general manager without taking anything from the current roster. And he could still work out, but I think we're seeing that he's not going to be any kind of an instant sensation. He can provide scoring punch, and I think he can also give Sullivan the 3-line depth, or closer to the 3-line scoring depth that he wants. He always talks about that. He is very loath to load up on the top 2 lines. I think he felt like he had to do it last playoff. It worked out to a certain degree, but ideally, and in today's NHL, you don't really see top-heavy teams succeed because you have to push the ice time around, because NHL hockey is so physically demanding these days with the pace of play I'm talking about. So to compete, you have to have, I think, 3 solid lines that can score a goal for you, and also 3 defense pairings that you're not afraid to throw out there, regardless of situation or time of the game. And with Sprong, that does give the at least potential of that. And I'd like to see him for a few more games before I make the call one way or the other that he's going to be able to be an asset, or he might be a work in progress at this level. But you have that. You have Jake Gensel moving to center. I kind of thought they would try that at some point, but with Carter Rowney going out due to injury, it seems like Mike Sullivan's hand was forced. And then you also have a player like Adam Johnson, who was rumored to be getting a call-up, or at least in line to get a call-up from Wilkes-Barre Scranton. He's a small center, but a quick one, and one that would seem to fit with how the Penguins like to play. So there are minor league options. There are options in shifting players around, a la Jake Gensel. And, those are always, I think, worthwhile as far as trying out before you make any kind of a significant roster move via a trade. And I think that's what the Penguins are doing right now.
So I guess going back to the concept of playing for 2018-19, or at the very least setting the team up for 2018-19, what are the kind of moves that you see that, I mean, obviously the team needs a center, but what do you see as a big picture? Like, do you think that the league has made some sort of change or adjustment to the Penguins' style over the last 2 years that needs to be changed? Can they just try to rebuild the last 2 Stanley Cup teams, and is that good enough? Or do they need to do something different going forward?
That's a really worthy and great question, I think. And I've heard from fans and media members this year, too, that, the teams have adjusted to the way the Penguins like to play. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I just think the league has gotten faster. There are better skaters coming into the league all the time, and it's more of a young man's game in that way. So drawing a conclusion there, you would say that perhaps the Penguins' window is closing quickly because their top guns aren't probably going to be able to keep up with that pace in the near future. I just think the league in general has adopted some of the tactics the Penguins used on their way to the Stanley Cup, especially in 2016. In 2017, they got great goaltending and great finishing in the playoffs, and that really helped them overcome some puck possession issues. And they were pretty much a break-even team in that last year, but they had enough high-end talent. Thank you to Gensel as well for coming up and supplying some extra oomph in the scoring department in that way. And both Marc-Andre Fleury and Matt Murray were excellent in the postseason last year. But you're not always going to get that kind of goaltending. You're not always going to get that kind of finishing. And you see teams throughout the league. The Carolina Hurricanes are, in fact, a great example of of teams that have just tried to embrace 4 lines, 3 pairings, chip the puck into open areas, go get it, use that relentless back check as well to put pressure on teams and take away their space. I know it's never been tougher to find space on an NHL rink because players back check so hard and they have the speed to get back and play a 5-man game in both zones, both offensive and defensive zones, and generate that speed through the neutral zone in transition. So it's just a matter of it's how it always happens in any sport, right, Alan? It's a team does really well with one thing, and then there are copycats and emulators, whatever you want to call them, and then you have to find that new inefficiency. And while you brought up the Pirates, they've been trying to do that for a little while since the trend of ground ball pitchers has kind of passed by, and it's not the easy way to get better, or not the optimal way to get better that it once was. So you have to continue to adjust as a general manager, as a franchise, and also build around your strengths. So I'm not saying the Penguins need to go big and heavy. In fact, I would argue with the roster they have that would probably just stick to what they do best right now. Now, if perhaps there are some roster changes, or maybe there's an opportunity to draft some bigger players, or players with different skill sets than what they have right now, then maybe you do make a subtle shift over the years. But for right now, I think they are best served in sticking to the speed and pace, and perhaps just writing the season off as an aberration, as a team that's a little worn out mentally and physically, and say that you can give it one more shot in 2018-19, because I still think there are enough players like Connor Sheary, like Brian Russ, like Jay Gensel, who have that quickness and speed as their primary asset, or one of their top assets. So you try to capitalize that and build around them.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think if anything, part of the issues with this season is that they got away from the things that worked so well for them the last, like you said, not so much in 2017, but that really worked for them in 2016. They didn't build a team that looked like that coming into this season. I think that's one of the problems that they have right now, is that Mike Sullivan is still coaching them like they are, but they aren't. And I don't think that's working particularly well.
Yeah, you see it when certain plays are made and they're just not able to get on those pucks and have that puck pursuit, to use a Mike Sullivanism. He often talks about how it's easier in today's game at times when you don't have the puck, because you're chasing it, you're able to dictate, and you can take away space and generate your offense that way. We haven't seen nearly as much of that, where the Penguins generate turnovers in the offensive zone and don't have to create from their own end and go 200 feet. It's not just transition, but it's also instant offense in creating those giveaways and taking the puck away that has fueled them over the past couple of seasons. So when you sign a Ryan Reeves, when you stick with Tom Kuhnhackl in the lineup, I know these are fourth-line players, but the fourth line has come through for the Penguins over the past 2 years. And as I was just talking about, the fourth line is now just another line. It doesn't need to be a change of pace or big, beefy guys, like one Penguin put it to me yesterday when comparing how hockey used to be and how it is now. If you have the horses, then you throw them out there. You don't worry so much about taking a pound of flesh or playing physically if that's not your game. And the way the Penguins are constructed, there are very few of those players anyway who would be at home banging around in the corners. And perhaps Riley Sheahan is a better fit for a fourth line that is more built toward that sort of type of play. And I think we saw that Tuesday in Philadelphia. But all that does is expose the fact that you don't really have another centerman for your third line, for the quicker, more skilled players that can play with them. So maybe Adam Johnson is the solution. I think the Penguins should exhaust all possible minor league call-up options before they really do something rash here and try to go all in on a season where they're already in a difficult spot. They're out of the playoffs. Other teams have games in hand on them, including the Islanders, who they'll play tonight at Barclays Center, where I'm sitting right now. And this season would be a bonus. I'll put it that way, Alan, if they make a serious run at this point.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I know you got a practice to catch, so I will let you run here. But we appreciate you taking some time to call in to your own show, and it's always good to have you on, Matt.
Oh yeah, it's quite the switcheroo. I'm sure I'll return the favor for you sometime in the future. And I'm just happy to be out of the cold. It is bitter in Brooklyn, and there are several inches on the ground. It's quite the urban tangle up here. I'm just happy I found my way to the rink.
There you go. Yeah. It's not any nicer here. Let me tell you that. It was about -2 out when I got up this morning. So,
yeah, we're all getting through it. Less snow in Pittsburgh, though, so we have that going for us.
yes. Less snow is fine. Well, that's Matt Gajtka in Brooklyn, New York. He'll be reporting on the Penguins at the Islanders tonight for DK Pittsburgh Sports. And this is Matt's show, Gike's Got Game. I'm Alan Saunders, guest hosting. I appreciate Matt letting me sit in his chair, and I also appreciate him coming on for us when he's able to. Usually makes for pretty good conversation. Matt and I have known each other for a long time. We can talk hockey for more than the hour that we're given every week, that's for sure. We have about a little over 10 minutes left. No, a little under 10 minutes left here. I want to talk about a couple of teams that I don't think get enough credit for their success in Pittsburgh. And the thing that they have in common is that they are women's college teams. I understand that Pittsburgh's a pro sports town primarily. Even the traditional college teams in this city, Pitt men's basketball, Pitt football, they occasionally or regularly, in fact, struggle to draw fans, draw interest, draw attention. The tier below that, the Duquesnes and the Robert Morrises of the world, they struggle mightily even in men's sports. Women's sports does not have the same type of fan base following, doesn't get the same amount of media attention, especially in a media market where most outlets are cutting back coverage, not adding to it. But I really think that there's two programs in this city at the women's level that have put together a pretty impressive run of success that needs to be recognized in my mind. The first one is the Duquesne women's basketball program under Dan Burt. Dan is as good of a guy in coaching as you're going to meet. He's down to earth. He's friendly, and he understands that building a program that before he got there didn't have any success. They'd never made the NCAA tournament. In 4 years, he's taken that team and built it into a culture where winning is expected, where high-level play is expected, and they're 12-3 right now, 2-0 in A10 play. They're 7-0 at home, and it's not that big of a story. And it's not that big of a story for one because, there's no beat writer that covers Duquesne women's basketball, but it's not that big of a story two because that's just sort of the expectation of where this program is right now. What they're expected to be is a really, really, really good mid-major women's basketball team that can play with just about anybody you put them on the floor. They played UConn this year, and the results of that game weren't pretty. They lost by almost 50, but UConn does that to a lot of people. The rest of their games, they played Virginia. They played Pitt. They beat both of those two teams. They beat Toledo. They beat Akron. It's not like they played the Sisters of the Poor in this non-conference game. I guess we should flip that analogy, right? Should the women's basketball game should play the Brothers of the Poor, right? If we're gonna keep the analogy. I don't know. It still doesn't work though because I have to think about that one. It's a cliche, though, and if Matt were here,
he'd ban it. He'd be done.
He'd be trying to kill it. So maybe we just won't. We'll scratch that. They didn't play CCAC Boyce in their non-conference schedule. How about that? It's full of good teams. They play really good basketball. They've built an international brand. If you haven't been to a Duquesne women's basketball game recently, and I'm going to assume that you haven't, they've got a Hungarian, two Canadians, a Serb, a Finn, a Spaniard, an Estonian. They've got another. They've got all kinds. All over the world. Plus, they've got some local talent. Chastity Almagrosso from Beaver Falls, really, really talented guard. Paige Cannon is from just over the border in Ohio. There's Kirsten Elliott's from Glenshaw. Connor Richardson's from Carleton. So, I mean, they have some players that are local too, but it's just a really interesting mix of international talent, local players that play talented up-tempo basketball, and they're coached by a really good guy, and they're really, really successful. And they've built that success into a family and a culture thing that I think is going to provide success for them for quite some time. And so if you don't have plans, if you can fit them in, if you can fit them into your plans, the Dukes are worth fitting into. When it comes to women's basketball, they're the best in the city right now. They're on the road for a little bit, but they've got a game against LaSalle on the 17th, George Mason on the 21st, St. Bonaventure on the 28th. Really, really quality. That one's actually on TV too, NBCSN. They're a good basketball team, and they're certainly worth you checking out. If you really like sports, you appreciate the chemistry and the team-building nature of putting together a team full of players from all over the world and getting them able to mesh in a championship caliber. That's what Dan Burt's done on the Bluff with the Dukes women basketball team, and it's certainly worth checking out. The last one I want to mention is one that's near and dear to my heart as the proprietor of Pittsburgh Hockey Digest, which you can find at berghockey.com, and that's the Robert Morris women's team. The Robert Morris women are 11-3-3 this year. They're coming off their first NCAA tournament appearance. Paul Colantino has been the head coach there for quite some time, but what they've been able to do in the last 3 or 4 years, especially when you look at the budget of that team, that program, I mean, Robert Morris as a university does not have a ton of money. None of their teams are in big name conferences or play top tier programs. The Robert Morris women's basketball team, they've played 3 games against the top 5 teams in the country. Women's hockey team. They played 3 games against the top 5 teams in the country this year, and I think they're 1-1-1 in those 3. They play at a really high level. They're the favorites to go back to the NCAA tournament out of their conference again this year. And they're playing the team they beat in the conference finals last year in Syracuse this weekend at the Island. And to me, especially, women's hockey is a sport that, for whatever reason, I don't know why, women's basketball is a perfectly accepted sport. You see women's basketball on TV. There's a pro league. They're in the Olympics. It's front and center in living rooms all over the world all the time. I don't know if it's anybody's favorite sport to watch. If you weren't part of that game, but lots of people watch women's basketball. For whatever reason, women's hockey doesn't get the same treatment. If you haven't seen women's hockey up close, it should be really, really high quality stuff at the Island this weekend. Go check it out, because that's 2 teams that really like to play. Abby Miller, the goaltender for Syracuse, is really, really talented, and Robert Morris might put 100 shots on her in 2 games. It's definitely worth checking out. Good players, good quality hockey. And so Dan Burt, Paul Colantino, and their staffs doing good things with women's sports in the city of Pittsburgh, and feel like they need more recognition than they get.
I love women's hockey. I used to cover the Cal U hockey teams. They were club hockey, but I really enjoyed going to the women's games. I wonder, do you think the WNBA is a reason why women's basketball is more popular to watch?
I don't know, because it was popular before the WNBA.
Oh, okay.
Because I think of the NCAA women's basketball tournament being pretty well televised, maybe. I don't know, but for whatever reason, basketball just became like the most popular women's sport to watch on TV and team sport. I mean, yeah. And I'm not sure why, but women's hockey has slightly different rules. I think that's one of the things that turns average hockey fans off, is that it's not checking, which people think, it's like basketball with sticks, but it's not. It's still a very physical game, just not a lot of open ice body checks. But yeah, I mean, it's really good. And
it's exciting.
And Robert Morris is really, really, really good. I mean, they tied Colgate, was number 4 team in the country. They're certainly capable of playing with they went 1-1 against number 5 Ohio State when they were here in Pittsburgh. I mean, they can play with the very best college hockey teams out there, and I'm excited, to be following them on my site, because that's championship caliber hockey out there, and that's good stuff. And Yeah,
And the Island Sports Center is a nice arena to watch it in too. So
it's if you get there and you can sit right down by the glass like you can for most of the women's games, it's an outstanding place to watch a hockey game.
definitely.
All right, man. I think we're out of time. I'll be back, but I don't know when. I guess Matt Gajtka will return next Friday. I assume so. Anyway, maybe we'll see.
If you liked what you hear, stay tuned after the show on the podcast version. Go to riversedgepgh.com/sports, and you can listen to Matt's Ban the Cliche for the week.
Oh, he's banning a cliche, right? I forgot all about
Yeah.
that. So we ran over. That's okay.
We
Matt,
can play it. Do you want to play it?
we can play it now.
Let's
It's up
play
to
it
you.
now. Let's play it now. So we'll go into overtime.
Over OT period on Gajtka game. Matt's gonna ban a cliche.
First edition of Gajtka Game for the 2018 season, if you will, here on the River's Edge. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka. This is our final segment, and since I was out of studio for this edition on the road in Brooklyn covering Penguins and Islanders for DKPittsburghSports.com, I thought I'd pre-record the final segment to get back into a recurring feature here on Gajtka Game that I do enjoy, but I needed a break from it for several weeks. So I did take a break from Ban the Cliche, but now I'm ready to go. I'm refreshed with the new year, got that mental reboot that we all need from time to time, and I'm all set to deliver my latest screed against lazy language in sports media or elsewhere. This one is exclusive to sports media, and I take you back to New Year's Day for this edition of Ban the Cliche. And this is not necessarily a grouping of words or a phrase, it's more of a concept. If you tuned in to the NBC broadcast of the Winter Classic from Citi Field, Sabres and Rangers, the Rangers winning it in overtime on Pittsburgh's own JT Miller's overtime goal, by the way. But if you tuned in, especially beforehand, it was about getting hockey back to its roots. There was a celebration. It's the 10-year anniversary of the first Winter Classic, which involved the Sabres and your Pittsburgh Penguins up at what was then Ralph Wilson Stadium in Buffalo, New York, Orchard Park, New York, but Buffalo area. You remember the snow globe. You remember Sidney Crosby scoring the shootout winner, giving the NHL a storybook conclusion to what was essentially, I don't want to call it a perfect event, but it came off just as you would have hoped if you were the NHL, to showcase the game in a totally different setting, outdoors, and it was just the second ever regular season outdoor game, and it has become a yearly tradition. It has spawned also the Stadium Series. We could get into whether that is oversaturation. I enjoy outdoor games generally, and I think for people on scene, they are very exciting. It's really quite the spectacle, as we experienced last year, those of us who were at Heinz Field for Penguins and Flyers. But if you tuned into the broadcast, like I was saying, you heard all these words and concepts and videos about the players getting back to their childhoods when they ostensibly played a lot of hockey outdoors. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen in Canada and places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe Michigan, perhaps Massachusetts, and generally New England. But if you grew up in Pittsburgh, this week accepted, with temperatures below freezing consistently for over a week, you didn't have a chance to play outdoor hockey, ice hockey at least. Now, I just watched the documentary of the first Winter Classic produced by the NHL, and during the practice day for the Penguins, Sidney Crosby was poking fun at Ryan Malone in a good-natured way, saying that, hey, Bugsy, which was Malone's nickname, Bugsy's never played an outdoor game outside of deck hockey. And deck hockey, if you're not familiar, is what we call road hockey in Pittsburgh. Road hockey is more of a Canadian term or an upper Midwest term. Here in Pittsburgh, we call it deck hockey. You're on your sneakers, you're shooting a ball, as opposed to being on skates and shooting a puck. But I think roller hockey, a lot of us in this area have played outside too. But I have never played outdoor ice hockey in Pittsburgh. Maybe I'll find a way this week with how cold the temperatures are. I did play a couple of times in Michigan, some pond hockey, and boy, was that a lot of fun. So I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile or it's not a valid connection to attach the Winter Classic with playing outdoors, especially as a kid. But I'm thinking more and more players in the NHL these days, as they come from more and more untraditional markets, or even Pittsburgh, which at this point is a traditional market but doesn't have the weather to play outdoor hockey. More and more NHL players aren't really rekindling anything. This is a totally new experience for them. And I know the AHL has played some outdoor games. College hockey has had some outdoor games. In fact, when I worked for Robert Morris a couple of years ago, they played an outdoor game in Toledo at the baseball field, the home of the Toledo Mud Hens, and Bowling Green University was the host there. So more and more we are seeing legitimate games, regular season games, being played outdoors. But overall, I think we're seeing fewer and fewer NHL players who have legitimate experience playing outdoors before they got to, say, major college hockey, junior hockey, minor league hockey, and then the NHL, where outdoor games have become more and more of a presence. And all you have to do is look back to last year for a great example. Austin Matthews of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who was a rookie last season, scored the overtime winner in what was called the Centennial Classic between the Maple Leafs and the Red Wings up in Toronto. It was a tremendous scene, but Austin Matthews is an Arizona native. There's no way he ever played outdoor hockey, at least coming up in Arizona. And I know he went on to Ann Arbor, Michigan to play for the U.S. national team program, and then on to Switzerland and for 1 year over there because he wanted to get his feet wet in professional hockey before he was draft eligible. And now with the Toronto Maple Leafs, yeah, he's going to get more opportunities, you would imagine, with the Maple Leafs being a high-profile team. However, I am fairly certain that last year's Centennial Classic outdoors was Austin Matthews' first al fresca hockey game, if you will. So the cliche that all these players are getting back to their roots, I just don't find that it rings very true. And I think it's hyperbole. It's over the top. It's already corny enough. And I don't mind the pageantry. I think that's fun. That's all in the name of selling the game and selling the scene. But to continue to pound this home, it's getting rather redundant that these guys are just being like school kids out there. Yeah, they are. I'm sure it's a lot of fun, and it's a different way of looking at the sport. But increasingly, as hockey becomes a sport that it draws from more diverse backgrounds, and I'm talking diverse geographically in this point, in this moment, I don't think it's really that valid of a point. So, yeah, play it up. Big stadium, big fun. It's a change. It's become a tradition in the NHL. All those are valid storylines, but the going back to your childhood, maybe we can take a break from that. And that's the cliche that I'm banning for this edition of Gajtka's Got Game. What do you have to say on that? Do you agree? Disagree? Leave a comment in our Facebook page for The River's Edge, or just get after me at social media. I'm on Facebook at Matt Gajtka Media. You can spell my last name Gajtka, and I'm also on Twitter at Matt Gajtka. Thanks again to Brian Crawford for producing this week's show. Thank you for listening and or watching. This has been Gajtka's Got Game, and this was Ban the Cliche. This is Matt Gajtka reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Back in studio next week. I'll talk to you then on The River's Edge.
All right, that's it for us for this week. Thanks, Matt, for that good use of banning the cliche. That's a solid one. I personally have played a little pond hockey, but not much in this area. All right, until next week, that's it. For Brian Crawford and Matt Gajtka, I'm Alan Saunders. Thanks for tuning in on River's Edge, and we'll see you next week.